In 1979, Professor Randall Collins published a book entitled The Credential Society, in which he argued that public schools are social institutions that teach and reward middle class values of competition and achievement. Collins claimed that the spread of higher education in America had not increased upward social mobility, but had in fact stymied it. With the expansion of high school and then undergraduate education came a cycle of credential inflation, where the production of credentials and job requirements kept steadily rising. And there were some other pesky consequences that accompanied this credential creep, such as great inflation, rising educational costs, and misleading job promises made by for-profit schools. Today, in an era marked by the devaluation of high school diplomas, concern regarding the value of expensive undergraduate degrees, and the proliferation of new professional degrees like the MBA, Collins' premise, made more than 40 years ago, might actually be more on point than it was back in 1979. In this episode of Think Significantly, we're going to talk about credential creep, how it came to be, how it manifests itself, its far-reaching repercussions, and what, if anything, we can do about it. Let's think significantly. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa, and always I am joined by my jaunty co-host, Pete.
Jaunty, I like that. I'm gonna put that on my resume.
Put that on your LinkedIn. It's better than being a jauntist. So,
yes, it is. I've heard such things. Yes, I've heard that is true.
At least you won't be able to go to HR and be like, they didn't hire me because my eyes are yellow.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me.
Right? Yeah. I can't tell you how many people come to me in HR. And I'm like, you still got to hire him.
Yeah.
His health benefits kick in 30 days.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. It's always a pleasure to be recording with you. I'm happy to be joining all our significant others out there thinking with us and listening to us. And I think it's best if we give a little background first before we jump into our conversation, to explain that our discussion hinges on really two separate but related concepts. And the first one is credentialism, which is the reduction of qualifications to status conferring pieces of paper.
That sounded very erudite. Status conferring pieces of paper. Will you all take your tassel and move it to the...
Yeah. I can dumb it down if you want.
No, I will right now. It's really the practice of relying on earned credentials when hiring staff or even assigning social status.
Right. It's not being able to even apply to a job if you don't have a certain certificate, even if you have the ability to perform in that role.
Yes, it's putting that formal educational credential above other ways of understanding human potential and ability. And it's really what is underlying credential creep or credential inflation.
Which is actually the second concept, the credential inflation, which is very much like regular inflation, but with credentials, right?
Yes, but gas is cheaper with it. Yes, exactly. Essentially, yes.
Yes, a lot of people full of hot air. So yeah, a lot of free gas.
So a good way to think about it actually comes from Collins himself, the author of the book that I started off with in the intro. Mm-hmm. And the way he frames it is he thinks of it as a credential vortex. Ooh. Right? Which such imagery here. So basically, you have a higher education system locked in this cycle of expanding access to degrees. So as more and more people can get degrees, what happens? It dilutes the value of those degrees in the employment market, which what happens? Drives like some of those degree holders back to campus for an even more advanced degree.
Right. Yeah. And conceivably, this could go on until lunch ladies need PhDs.
You think I'm getting my PhD for nothing? I want to be slinging pizza. I want to be.
you want hey, Meatloaf Wednesdays, man. That's where it's
at. That's right. I'm going to put this hairnet to good use. That's exactly right.
I can see it now.
So it's also known as up credentialing, which is essentially what you're you're capturing when you explain it as the lunch ladies needing PhDs, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm.
before, an undergrad degree would have been enough to get you an entry level job, but now like an entry level job requires a master's degree. And before we get too much into our discussion, I just want to say that, it looks like we're to blame employers, right, for requiring these inflated credentials, which to some degree, haha, pun intended,
Right.
pun not intended, which, employers ought to be blamed. But I'm also like, if I can get somebody who has a master's degree versus a bachelor's degree, wouldn't, I mean, can we really fault them? You know what I'm saying?
Right. No,
I mean, we
absolutely not.
can.
Right. Well, sure, we're going to, but there's right an argument to be made for if you can do it, then why not do it?
Right.
But I think your even your example is a little bit inflated because you're talking about an undergrad degree getting an entry level job, but did you know in the 1970s, 3 out of 4 jobs required a high school diploma or less, and in 2021, in contrast, 2 out of 3 jobs required some sort of post-secondary education.
So in our lifetime, basically, I needed to be like a middle school graduate, and now I need to have a graduate degree to hold like the same job potentially.
Potentially, yeah. No, that's absolutely right.
Crazy. I believe it, though. I believe it. And what slays me is that when I'm reading these job postings, right, and they're asking for a degree, and I know that the skill set that job needs is not taught in that bachelor's degree program.
Sure.
Boy, that chaps me. I'm not even gonna lie. It really does. And what's crazy is that this shift that we're talking about right now is especially pronounced in positions that have historically been dominated by workers without a college degree. So like what changed, right?
Right.
Well,
right. I think it's getting back to what you said. It's if I can get somebody with a degree to do this job for the same wage, essentially, why not? I mean, I think the rationale is the higher education results in a higher quality employee, which will result in a higher quality product for the company. But that's dubious at best, right?
You say that. I wish this was almost like not just voice, because I just rolled my eyes so hard. I almost lost a contact back in my brain.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the math I think that's being done here. And we see, like, in your example, employers are asking for bachelor's degrees, not only when that bachelor's degree didn't yield the skills that job needed, but in many cases, asking for the degree made that position harder to fill. And with our aging workforce, this isn't the direction that we need to be moving in.
Right, exactly. So you think of it as like elevating it, but in my mind, the visual I get is they just drop the limbo stick just like a little lower, right? You know what I mean? Though?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So less people can get in. Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So yeah. So like, not only is the employer not getting what they need in a timely fashion, but what also is happening here is that they're making a lot of those middle skill career pathways just obsolete. There's almost no way to get into certain career fields these days, like executive assistants, right? I don't want to be an executive assistant straight out of my graduate program in US history and world art. You know what I'm saying?
Right. No, I wouldn't want to either.
I don't.
Yeah, those middle skill jobs have been disappearing for decades now. And I know that we're mainly talking about employers right now, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the part that colleges and universities play in this.
Oh, don't even get me started. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. We could have done an episode just on this.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, higher education is basically like a credential cartel. It really does. Colleges have really an unprecedented monopolistic power in controlling credentials and job entry. They are really the ones holding those job opportunities in their little sweaty little palms for a large percentage of our workforce.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yeah. The university definitely plays a role in controlling the rights of entrance to the job market. Right. And as efforts have been made over time to make that education available to the most people, we've seen the cost skyrocket again making higher education unattainable for some.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know since 1980, the cost of a college education has risen 169%? Now, you compare that with the roughly 9% median wage increase over that same span, and it isn't hard to realize that it's out of reach for many Americans.
Or it creates this crazy conundrum where, like, in order to be an executive assistant, I have to have a master's degree. So I go get my master's degree, but then I can't afford to pay off my student loans because I'm an executive assistant.
Right, not making what an executive assistant makes, right?
Right, exactly. This is really, what Collins's whole premise was. I think that, well, the way he frames it, actually, the way he phrases it rather is he says that, and this is way back when. That's what kills me, is that it's so applicable to today. But like, he was talking about it like many moons ago, like 40 years ago.
Mhm.
He was talking about that these spiral education requirements have transformed college campuses into toll booths on the road to middle class respectability. Toll booths.
Yeah, I think toll booths is exactly the right metaphor to use there. I mean, they're essentially just collecting fees to allow entry into the workforce. I mean, that's what they're doing. Because really, like you said, for a lot of jobs, the degree program doesn't teach you the skills you need to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another reason that college education is desirable, beyond getting that access, is that it provides a perceived socioeconomic, which actually means competitive advantage. And this isn't anything new. I mean, I think that predates even Professor Collins's 40-year-old book.
So you're hinging on the perceived part there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to help me, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
getting this degree is going to make me a more attractive candidate. I think this certification is going to give me a leg up over the competition for this position.
Mm-hmm. Right. But as we were talking about this in preparation for this, right, we were talking about like this even comes down to like the fiber of our nation, right? This is what you were saying you had discovered in your preparation.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So let me give you a breakdown of a quick breakdown of the history of higher education credentials, right? Which is distinct from the underlying education itself. Okay, so the history of higher education credentials is the history of the elite trying to distinguish themselves, right? During the colonial era, very few students completed degrees or earned any credentials. Then, in the years leading up to the revolution, the bachelor's degree emerged as the accepted way for the merchant elite to bestow social status on their sons. Attempting to increase the prestige of one's occupation became the standard among working class individuals trying to recover from the financial hardships of the time. And then unqualified individuals turned to professions such as medicine and law, which at the time had very low barriers to entry.
Oh, the jokes I could make.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't know if it's that applicable here, but the whole thing about people being called doctor, right? And they're like, unless you're a medical doctor. And I'm like, actually, it started off in academia. And then they bestowed doctor upon medical folk, right? To differentiate them from the guy selling his snake oil door to door.
Right.
Which, don't underestimate that. A little behind each ear, clear you're right up. Anyways, yeah, good.
For a majority of our nation's history, it was unusual for people to go seeking these degrees and these credentials. I mean, up until World War II, the percentage of adults with bachelor's degree stayed below 5%. But as of 2021, we're at 37.9% of adults having a bachelor's degree.
And I don't know that we've gotten that much smarter in the process. I hate to say.
I don't think that we're 37.9% smarter. No.
So I think it's interesting that you brought up the revolution with the tri-corner hat, because I definitely think that part of credential creep is this effort to set oneself apart. Like, here's where I'm going. You said it's to set the elite apart, from the non-elites or whatever, but being self-reliant is such a big part of our culture as Americans. Like, everybody is expected to be self-reliant. As Horatio Alger tells, these bootstraps aren't going to pull themselves up.
You also have to consider how capitalism factors into this drive to edge others out.
Mm-hmm.
In The Tyranny of Merit, which was published in 2020, Michael Sandel, an American philosopher, argues that meritocratic capitalism created a permanent state of competition within society, which corrodes solidarity and the notion of the common good. And I'm using air quotes around common good.
Mm-hmm.
This system sustains an order of winners and losers, which breeds hubris and self-congratulation among the former and chronically low self-worth among the latter.
Meritocratic capitalism, I get that on the back of a sweatshirt, right? I'm like, whoa.
So it's the name of my college band.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
It's what I'm majoring in. And then I want to be a construction worker.
Right, of course.
So yeah, I saw an ad for it. So I was like, I've always wanted to swing a hammer. I should probably major in meritocratic capitalism.
That's right.
I don't know that I have anything that astute to add in here, but I was simply going to say that basically people are likely to grow dissatisfied with like what they have and who they are. And I was going to bring in what always seems to sneak its way into our episodes. I was going to talk about social media and how this sort of goes hand in glove with our achievements, right?
Sure.
Because with social media, you're always facing that pressure to construct that perfect public image, right?
Yes.
Well, my point is, in the absence of like these intrinsic feelings of worth, which we are deeply missing in today's society, we tend to measure our value against external measures like popularity, professional achievement, and academic record.
Absolutely.
And when we fall short of those expectations, we don't feel so good. We just don't. Like there's certain things that creep in. We feel bad at best, like shame, humiliation at worst.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no shortage of that floating around for sure. And that actually makes me think of two things. And one is something that I came across while doing my prep work for this episode. And it's about how Credential Creep now includes social media statistics. Like the number of followers you have is actually worth something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, this is the thing. Yes. No. And then we're not just talking about influencers, folks. We're talking about in the business world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was this article that said one of the newest, most important credentials is the number of Twitter followers you have.
Unbelievable.
Tens of thousands of followers is considered just as important in some fields as a degree.
And it's, I mean, for comparison, it would be like the hairdresser that gets hired because they brought their own book of clients with them. Right, they brought their own following. They brought a customer base into their new place of employment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great parallel. That's a great parallel. Yes, exactly. So, what was you said you had two thoughts?
Oh yeah, the other thing is something else that we discussed before outside of recording, and that's the pursuit of achievement, of perfection.
Oh yes, always needing more.
Right. That sense, I mean, we've discussed before that perfection is unattainable, right? And the sensation of even approaching it or achieving something that gets you closer to what you think perfection is quickly fades and requires constant refreshing.
Like that mouse hitting that bar. More dopamine, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, that interplay between perfectionism and credential seeking, it really comes as no surprise. So there's an American psychologist, Randy Frost. In 1990, he developed 35 questions designed to measure perfectionism. He actually titled it a multidimensional perfectionism scale. And he distinguishes between three very broad but distinct types of perfectionism. Okay. And the first type is self-oriented perfectionism. And yes. So this is this refrain that is bonging around in all of our heads that it just insists that we must do better, that we should do better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it breeds this like obligation to become this idealized version of ourselves, which is just simply exhausting.
Right. That's the classic definition of perfectionism, right?
Right.
It's I need to be the best I can be. And it makes sense. I mean, look at the cover of any self-help book anywhere. You're always trying to be happier, fitter, richer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Happiest. Right. Fittest.
Yeah.
Happiest.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So the second type is socially prescribed perfectionism, which
Mhm.
leaves us trying to live up to the expectation of others. And this often manifests itself in fantasies of like criticism. It's this internal monologue that tells us what we should be and what we should do, like what others expect out of us. So one is self, and then one is what I think Pete thinks I should be.
Right.
And
Yeah.
those two, I think, are really applicable to this idea about how we're always trying for more, to include credentials.
Sure. I know there's a third one, and I know you're not going to leave us hanging.
Yeah, there is a third one. I wasn't able necessarily to make the deepest connection on this one to the topic, but
Mhm.
yeah, I'll share it. Other oriented perfectionism, that's what turns that voice outwards as we demand that those around us also live up to our impossible ideals. And
Okay.
it's most obnoxious when wielded as like an instrument of power. It's like the parent who asks his child why she got an A- in that one class, right? Like, why
Uh-huh.
is it an A-? Or the boss who has no compassion for his employee who just can't power through, quote unquote, the flu, right?
Yeah.
Or his jaundiced. Yeah, no,
Yeah. I would rather have a
yeah.
jaundiced employee, I think, than a fluish one.
At this, after living through the pandemic,
Yeah.
yes, right.
Yeah.
Remember before how we used to come to work sick and everyone's like, "That's awesome,"
Yeah.
and now we're like, freaking Jack down the hall. What the hell, man?
Oh, I
Yeah.
know. I know. Nobody gives you any static. You're like, I'm sick. They're like, stay home. But hey, I think you said you didn't have a strong connection to that other centered. That's what it was called, right? Other centered
Other
perfectionism.
oriented.
Other oriented. Yes.
Yeah.
I think I have a way to tie that in, and
Okay.
and that makes me think of the quasi recent fascination with the tiger mom movement and the effect
Hmm.
that has on children.
I like how you think it's quasi recent. I think it depends on your culture, right? I think
Oh,
some
yeah,
folks are
absolutely,
like, always
absolutely,
gonna,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
I think folks outside of that cultural community are now learning about it and being like, either they're really like just shocked and like horrified, or they're like, hey, I'm all about that, right?
right, right,
Yeah. Amy Chua, and about being a very heavily involved parent to get the best out of your kids, to like squeeze every ounce of like life out of them.
right, and demand that they perform up to your standards, which
Yeah.
I mean may not be perfect, but it's certainly higher than average,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when you said that someone who is focused on the perfection of those around them, this is exactly what came to mind, right?
Mhm.
And there was a study I came across, that it was a 5-year study that was conducted with 263 7-year-old children in Singapore, where, like you said, this is probably a more common cultural parenting style than what we're used to here. That study showed that this kind of intrusive parenting resulted in nearly 60% of the children developing maladaptive social perfectionist tendencies, along with an increased level of self-critical beliefs and language by the time they were 11.
So you're saying that the other centered perfectionism is relevant here because it helps to create more perfectionists, which is going to perpetuate this pursuit of higher and higher credentialing.
Precisely. Those other centered people are instilling in the people around them a feeling that perfection is the only way to success.
Mm.
And if it's okay, I'd like to actually take a step back and readdress something that we mentioned earlier about folks trying to get an edge, because I think it ties in with the increasing prevalence of maladaptive perfectionism.
Well, you know me, I love taking steps back to talk about maladaptive perfectionism. If I'm known for one thing, it's
Oh,
it's that.
I
So
know,
yeah,
I know. Hardly a conversation goes by where we don't like take a time out and be like, hey, there's some maladaptive perfectionism I want to squeeze in here.
it's my hashtag that I'm known for. Yeah, it's going to be my new Instagram account. Yes,
Yeah, right.
maladaptive
That could
perfectionism.
be your
Yes, go
college
ahead.
band name.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
So what I want to point out is that we the royal we human beings, we don't like to be average. Like we really, really, really do not like to be average.
We don't like to be average. Yeah, no, right. No, I would agree with you, despite like most psychological traits being normally distributed, right?
Right, right.
I'm thinking of the bell curve, right? But no, you're right.
That's exactly my point, right?
Mhm.
65% of people are going to have average intelligence, average personality, average memory, average happiness, average leadership, average creativity. But most people are going to rate themselves as better than average on almost any of those traits, which, I mean, it's a statistical impossibility.
What is an average personality, by the way?
I think a lack of maladaptive anything would probably be an average personality.
Reminds me of the last get together I had, right? And I was like, oh, that guy, he's got
Yeah.
a average personality. Yeah, exactly.
He's so basic. Ugh. I
Oh,
mean,
he's not
honestly, that's
extra.
how much of a put down is it to call someone basic, which is average? That you're just average.
Yeah. Well, telling people they're average is offensive. It is. It's seen as an insult. No, if
Yeah,
I said that you're average, you'd be highly offended, right?
absolutely.
I think people prefer to be unique, but like in a bad way than to be like normal in a good way, right?
Which is
You'd rather be like some Bonnie and Clyde sort of character than just to be normal in a healthy sort of way.
so this need to be special, right? This need to stand out from the crowd is absolutely on the rise, particularly here in the US,
Hmm.
right? And in the 50s, only 12% of college students described themselves as an important person, again with the air quotes. And by the 1980s, the figure had risen to 80%. And this may be a stretch on my part, but I think this has an influence on people constantly pursuing new credentials.
That's interesting. I think I could see it going both ways, right? Like influencing each other from both sides. The new
Mhm.
credentials sort of define it. But you know what's interesting?
What's
So
that?
you're saying in the 50s, 12% of college students describe this as an important person. But
Right.
now you're looking at the 80s where you have that many more people in college.
Mhm.
You're talking about just an N, a much bigger N, right? You have a
Right.
lot. It's not the 80 to the 12% isn't as like shock and awe as if you think about how many people were in college in the 50s versus how many people were in the 80s.
Right.
You had a
No,
lot more people.
yes, there are many, many, many more people in college in the 80s than there ever were in the 50s.
Right. And I mean, what better way to differentiate yourself than what we were talking about before than that post a nominal set of letters on my LinkedIn profile? I
Right.
mean, but to your point, as soon as you said like 50s, 12%, 80s, 80%,
Right.
those are like the exact same numbers that are used in like a pretty well-known study about the rise of like narcissism. It's known as like a narcissism epidemic
Oh
in
wow.
modern Western societies. Yes. Oh, do not get even me started on content analysis that are based on or that review like speaking of song lyrics, right? And in
Mhm.
recently published books, pronouns I and me are used more frequently than we and us now.
Uh-huh.
The phrase I am the greatest has increased exponentially between like 1960 and 2008.
Oh wow.
Like this is in our language. Yes,
Uh-huh.
this is a thing.
Oh
Yes.
wow. And what's ludicrous about people wanting to be the, I said earlier, what's ludicrous about them wanting to be the est, the best, the greatest, the strongest, the tallest, is that there are sincere advantages to being and even feeling average.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I say, I really don't want to be on top of the totem pole because the only place you can go is down, right? Like don't put
Yeah,
me on the pedestal
right.
because right, it's tough being up there, right? And you want to talk about being able to avoid most physical and psychological illnesses? Be average.
Yeah.
Be average and you shall,
And
protect thyself. Yes.
and be comfortable or want to be average. Like that's
Mhm.
the right. But
Yeah.
but even desirable characteristics, you've got ambition, sociability, confidence, conscientiousness. They're all problematic when they're exacerbated or taken to the extreme,
Hmm.
right? Ambition turns into greed, sociability into exhibitionistic attention seeking. confidence into arrogance. Conscientiousness turns into obsessive compulsive behavior.
Right. It's that too much of a good thing effect, which is a thing. It's not just a phrase, right? That's an actual effect out there.
Right.
Yeah, it suggests that the very high scores on these traits that you mentioned, which who doesn't love exhibitionistic attention seeking? That will be the name of my band. Yes. Yeah, but high scores on these traits and like other what we think of as desirable characteristics are as inconvenient and counterproductive as very low scores. You truly are better off just being average. Unless you're trying to get a job, of course.
Well, right. That's the whole crux of the discussion here.
Right.
But it also helps that, I mean, since you probably are average in most of those qualities anyway, feeling average reduces your cognitive dissonance and will translate into higher self-awareness, which is far better than the much more common alternative, overconfident delusion, which is another great college band name.
Well, when you put it like that, I mean, I'm like, excuse me, would you like to be average or overconfident delusional? I'm like, oh my God.
Oh gosh.
I guess average? I don't
know. Given those choices, I guess I'll go that way.
Yeah.
I mean,
sure.
and to be fair, there's an evolutionary explanation for the prevalence of these enhanced self-views. And I think it's related to this topic of credential creep. We're talking about how it is increasingly difficult to judge other people's talents with precision. Hence why we resort to a collection of letters after our names. Right. But overconfidence, just like a bunch of credentialed letters, can enable people to fool others into thinking that they are competent.
It also fools us into thinking that we are competent. I will let you know.
Yeah, sure.
Really
yeah. I mean, we don't lie to anybody as much as we lie to ourselves.
Yeah. So I think we got to shift here. Let's start talking about what we can do about this credential creep, because right now I feel like we're in a dim spot and I want to just shed some light on this.
Sure.
So for this part of the discussion, I thought about we've talked about this before. This is the so in the early 2000s, this is Peter Thiel. He wrote a critique of college as a bubble in the classic sense. And then he announces his Thiel Fellowship Program. So you get $100,000 grants to college students who drop out of college to pursue an entrepreneurial project.
Yeah, I'm absolutely familiar with this. And I'm kind of intrigued to see where you're going to go with it, right? The Thiel Fellows were like the kid version of a Young Presidents Organization. They were lauded as a league of extraordinary, courageous, brilliant individuals who should be a shining light for the rest of society. And they're, wearing their college dropout sweaters everywhere.
Oh yeah, the sweatshirts that read dropout on them instead of your college, like your college here.
Right.
It was like dropout. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're wondering if I see the irony in this, I do, because Thiel's attempt to disrupt this culture of credential gathering turned out to become one of the most elite credentials a young person could achieve. They're like, I'm a Thiel fellow.
Yeah. Right. So the new elite credential is actually an anti-credential.
Right. We've hit the apex. We're now on the downside of the upside down U. Right.
The parabola.
If only I taught math, Pete. Yes, the parabola.
I think
the upside down U.
Yeah, I think the listeners are going to follow us if we say parabola. I think they're going to stay with us on that one.
Well, at least we're not asking you to describe it. You're like,
right,
okay,
yeah, right,
so.
Yeah. But are we really on the downside of the parabola? Like, if all we're doing is saying that now the credential is to be a dropout, a disruptor, an innovator sans initials, wouldn't this rose smell just as sweet if it was called something else?
I mean, yeah. I mean, you have a point. It's still like it's something to aspire to, interestingly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, I feel like it's just more of the same on a different path is all. And sooner or later, and hopefully sooner, corporate America will begin to ask the right questions relating to the funding of credential inflation.
I think we're seeing this now. I really do. For a variety of reasons. One, we are experiencing a very tight job market, and beggars cannot be choosers,
Sure.
right? Like you can keep the credential requirements and pay college level wages, or you can drop out any unnecessary credential requirements and actually fill your jobs. Like
Right.
these are your choices at this point.
Right. And how hard is it for employers to change their hiring and management practices and focus on job skills rather than continuing to prioritize college degrees? I mean, stop relying on a bachelor's degree as a broad recruitment filter that may or may not correspond to the specific capabilities needed to do the job you're hiring for.
Right, absolutely. So it's like, the employer is going to have to look at their screening processes. And when I say employer, I'm talking to anybody out there who hires people. I'm not
Absolutely.
talking like IBM as an entity. I'm talking about looking at yourself even and being like, what do I need to fill this job? Like, what is
That's right.
required here? But a lot of companies are actually coming around to this. This is what I was alluding to before. You got a lot of tech companies, Dell, Apple, Google. They've stopped requiring college degrees for employment. Elon Musk just said you didn't need a degree to work at Tesla. You can make a magical flying automatic car and you don't need a degree.
Well, given the record of Teslas, I'm not sure that that's the endorsement maybe we want to push. But
as your car's not starting, you're like, from here on out, I'm only hiring people with advanced degrees.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. But that makes so much sense, especially in that sector, in the tech sector, where the skills you need to be really good at what you do don't need to be learned in college, probably, or better not learned in college. I've heard of people becoming really brilliant coders after using YouTube videos to teach themselves. And that's something that is constantly evolving, is that skill set.
I don't know about learning on YouTube about the coding, but I've sure fixed my fridge. Yeah. Which made me feel more on top of the world, honestly, than potentially getting a job. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. YouTube's just got everything you need is there. Trust me.
Everything. Don't even go to college anymore. Maybe YouTube should come out with its own university.
Yeah, right? Well, but that goes against the whole like YouTube videos aren't research argument that I like to make. So
then we can't have that then.
There's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere. YouTube, good for practical applications, bad for philosophy.
So basically, I think what we're saying is that the real challenge we face is that if everyone is hiring for the ability to do a job rather than for the potential to do it well, like, how does anyone get that initial experience? I still keep going back to this. Like, how do you get on the highway if you're not allowed to merge?
Right. If the toll booth's keeping you out. And if there are fields that require unnecessary occupational licensing requirements, those should be eliminated. Right? The focus should be on competency, not on the credentials that are on a piece of paper. A college degree is not a substitute for capability.
So one way of seeing if someone has the skills is to test them. And you could do that by like providing, I don't know, an internship, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to do it. That's a great way to see if somebody's got the skills to match the job that they're seeking. Right. And that's on this trend that we've seen over the last few decades, where employers want to hire people that are ready to step in and work day one, instead of hiring someone and investing in their training to make them competent and efficient in their job.
Right. There is a return on investment concern for businesses, definitely, that make them fearful, understandably, of investing time and money into training someone only to have them leave to work somewhere else. But there's ways that you can do that, right? You can have agreement with somebody. I mean,
Yeah, but the alternative is that you don't invest in them and they leave anyway.
Right. Or I got a worse one for you. You don't invest in their development and then they stay.
And then you're left.
We talked about one of the other episodes, right? It was like some 4-square matrix. It's like they're not really good at their job, and they're like low skill, and they're a problem.
Right. Yeah. And there are a million ways that companies can show that they value the development of their current employees over hiring someone with the right credentials, right? One of these barriers that has always vexed me was not allowing employees to take a promotion into a supervisor role without a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
These people are a known commodity, right? If you're looking at someone and considering promoting them into those supervisor position, that means they've got the skills they need to do the job. What difference does it make whether or not they've got the diploma?
Understood. Exactly. And then, were you going to say something? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I understand if you want to have that for an external candidate, okay, I get it. But it doesn't make sense if you're promoting from within. That's all.
And I think in the amount of lag time it takes to get someone on, if you have a group of employees already at work who are already making the ship sail without that new hire, you don't need a new hire. You need to be promoting from within. So they've clearly been able to do the job this entire time. So
yeah, that's a fantastic point. Right. Is that position even needed?
Right. I'm going to say, do you need that credential, that elevated credential for it? Right. Exactly. And you know what kills me is when I do this sort of look at companies that demand elevated credentials, but they don't offer tuition reimbursement. They don't offer professional education, no just-in-time training, no industry conference attendance is allowed, right? That's what you need to be doing.
Yeah.
Train your own, build your bench.
Right. And almost anywhere you look, all of the advice available on retaining employees emphasizes investing in their development and showing them they have room to grow within the company.
Knocking out those unnecessary qualifications and focusing on developing internal talent would be a paradigm shift. And given the state of the market and all these drawbacks of credential creep that we've outlined here, like growing your talent is like probably one of the most novel things a company could do.
You're absolutely right. Stop chasing unicorns and develop the people that are already making you successful. And, with that little bit of advice, I think it's safe for us to wrap up this discussion. Would you like to send us out?
But first, I want to quote from TLC. They said, don't go chasing waterfalls. Stick to the rivers and the lakes that you're used to, man.
Yeah. Yes. I should have gone with waterfalls instead of unicorns. My
now
fault.
I'm on fire. I gotta go do something. I gotta go pull our job announcements down and say, no, we don't want that requirement anymore.
That's right.
Right. I want to see what is out there. I want to see people who are hungry and on fire.
That's right.
Not literally. Right. That's weird.
Right. No. Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, Pete and I would love to continue this discussion about credential creep on social media. How often have you run into a job that you knew that you could do, that you had the experience to do, but you didn't meet the entry requirements for it because they were just souped up?
Have you pursued advanced credentialing that was underwhelming? Have you been part of a hiring process that disqualified otherwise attractive candidates because they didn't have the exact certification? Have you ever used a credential to make a decision between two otherwise equally attractive candidates? Reach out and let us know your thoughts.
Ooh, that last one. Look in the mirror at yourself and be like, have you done this yourself? Yeah. Et tu, Brute? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, you can find us at the Twitter and on the Instagram at ThinkSigPod, and of course on Facebook and LinkedIn by searching for Think Significantly.
If you enjoyed our conversation, please rate and review us on your podcast platform and invite your curious friends to listen. Melissa and I will be back next week to discuss another way they get you.
And until then, we encourage everyone to think significantly about the world around you.